Welcome to Behavior Bite for today. We're going to be together for about an hour, so we appreciate you being here. Today's Behavior Bite is called Instructional Considerations for All Teachers when Supporting Students with Emotional and Behavioral Challenges. So for today, we're really going to be targeting all teachers as well as all students. As other people are coming in, we want to be mindful of Patton's mission is to support the efforts and initiatives of the Bureau of Special Ed and to build the capacity of local educational agencies to serve students who receive special education services. Our goal for each child is to ensure IEP teams begin with the general education setting with the use of supplementary aids and services before considering a more restrictive environment. My name is Silke Caparelli. I'll be with you today for about an hour. You'll have an opportunity to, if you have questions as we're moving through, feel free to put them in the chat box. We have Tara Russo, who's helping out today, as well as Dr. Cole Holland-Sims. So a collective team here to meet your needs and hopefully provide information that you'll find useful to your work as a teacher or an administrator. There are additional materials and resources just for your awareness located, including a recording of today's session and a recording of our past behavior bites. So you'll be able to find those. If you need this link, I think Tara will probably put this link in for you. There's a lot of materials there. Also, your handouts for today are located in there as well. And you can see the dates of the past behavior bites here. A PDF of today's slides are in there, as well as I think I have about 8 handouts for you to use and consider. We cannot dive into anything of behavior without thinking about our expectations for us collectively as a team of learners. So our expectations today are that we're respectful and responsible. Be mindful of your camera. Check for those background items that you may not want anyone to see. Or remember, we also want to be responsible and participate in discussions by responding to poll questions. So we have 3 poll questions for you today. We're really not going to have an opportunity to really deep dive into discussion that we can really have healthy discourse about, only because we just have an hour. But know that a lot of the work that we're doing today will fuel future moments like the Behavior Bite here today. And we also want to encourage you to be present on the Zoom call, as in take advantage of this hour of time that we have together to learn and to consider your own practices as much as possible. These are the learning targets for today. So they're not going to give you a moving target. This is what our aim is for you to get. We want you to help you self-reflect on your current approach to behavior challenges. We want to help you identify 4 components of behavior, offer a description of effective Tier 1 preventative strategies and effective Tier 1 responsive strategies, and that'll make sense to you in a moment here. So we're going to keep this simple right now, just so you understand the pathway of our learning. As Tier 1 is evidence-based practices and strategies, we know the strategies we're visiting today are ones that will prevent unwanted behaviors from occurring. Then we will end the hour with an understanding of practices that work in response to negative behavior. So again, we're just going to keep it simple. The first part of our learning today will be about prevention that we do for Tier 1 systems. Things that we explicitly have ready, have in place, have professional development around, so that we prevent as much as possible those behavior challenges that tend to take away from learning and that are also indicators that a student actually maybe needs specific instruction around that behavior or needs a little bit more of academic engagement. So I want to take a second and situate, where does student discipline fall in relation to the happiness of our teachers, the happiness of us as teachers in a classroom. So according to the 2008 Gallup poll, discipline is the second greatest challenge faced in education today, next to the lack of funding. So that was 2008, which was 12 years ago. So I wanted to offer you an updated one. And one of the top reasons teachers leave the profession in 2018 is due to a lack of ability to effectively manage classroom behavior. So note that what you don't see here, like reasons teachers are not frustrated about reading or writing or math, discipline is featured in both of these research, both of the polls here that were done. This begs the question, why do many schools run without a formal plan for behavior or a formal plan for social emotional learning? So consider this research and what it means to your work as a teacher or an administrator. I'm getting ready to open up a poll, so pay very close attention to this language so that we can see where you are. Increasing the number of teachers ending their profession, especially today. There's a lack of substitutes. We're anticipating a lack of teachers. But we also need to address the persistent problem of teacher turnover in the field. Each year, more than 200,000 teachers leave the profession, with nearly 2 of the 3 leaving for reasons other than retirement. That's it. Only 1/3 leave for retirement. So what are the other reasons teachers leave the field? Student discipline is about student behavior. Like math, reading, sciences, the arts, physical education, health education, addressing student behavior is incumbent upon each and every teacher and administrator. Being methodical about how we address negative behaviors and how we teach behavior we want will encourage teacher confidence and teacher success. So I want to pause here and I'm going to ask you this question. Of the 4 reasons listed on the right side of the screen, on days where you are ready to depart the field, which of these is the #1 reason? So I'm hoping you can see your poll. Tara, can you give me confirmation of that? Here we go. Okay, so the voting's coming in. Take about 20 seconds here. This shouldn't take very long. Now, there were other reasons. These were the top 4 reasons that came up in this research that was done. Oh, I love these results. So interesting. Keep them coming in. I'm having about, let's see, we have about 50. Oh no, we have about 81 attendees. We have 53 votes. Come on, everybody, get them in. Really think about it. I'm sure you could probably pick any one of these, but on the days you're ready to like submit that letter of resignation, what is it due to? Okay, I'm closing the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, here's our results. Can everybody see the results? Tara?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, thanks. So interestingly, lack of administrative support at 41%, teacher workload at 29%, student discipline coming in at 26%, and lack of opportunity to collaborate with colleagues at 14%. Excellent. So absolutely, like the lack of administrative support, we can talk, we can address a little bit today. Each of you has a different experience given the buildings that you're working in, but interesting feedback for sure. Thank you for sharing. Now, Tara, will we have record of this? Like, I'm not going to lose this data, right?
I actually just took a screenshot of it, so I will put it inside of our folder also, because I'm sure that there's a lot of people that find this very interesting also. So yes, we will preserve this data.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, so let's move on here. How does your school determine students who are having difficulty with reading? So not behavior. I want you to think about what you do for reading. Our elementary teachers are seriously crafted at benchmarking diagnostic assessments to determine who is responding to the core reading curriculum and who may need more support given specific reading concepts. Now think about how your school determines students who are having difficulty with behavior. So we have reading skills for students, math skills for students. Let's talk about behavior skills. How do they determine the success for Tier 1 behavior systems? Just like reading, is there a system in place for reviewing school-wide data to determine how effective the behavior curriculum is? For many schools, the answer is no, no, and no. They're like, behavior curriculum? That might be foreign to some of us. We're going, we don't have a behavior curriculum. But for some of you, you may be in schools that are implementing or building your PBIS framework, your multi-tiered system of support. For many skills, the only component when it comes to behavior can be reactive and comes in the form of a negative punisher. So we want you to really be thinking about teaching reading, teaching math, teaching behavior. Here's a list of data points that can support your exploration of how effective your current system of behavior is. So the first one we call triangle data. When you map the percentage of students within each of these thresholds, a healthy system will reflect in this way. Many people confuse this data. They're like, well, we have 50% of our students with 0 to 1 discipline referrals, because it's our student demographic. So when a nixay that thinking, that's an error in thinking. Actually, your triangle data is telling you how effective your behavior system is. I'm gonna come back to that in a moment. You can also use any of these data points to determine students' current response to Tier 1 behavior system. So you can use this data to determine your system effectiveness, but you can also use this to determine any student's response or how your students are coping in your school system. So we do this by setting thresholds. I'm going to wrap up our session today by giving you examples of how to set those thresholds so you better understand. And what we would call these indicators, but this would also be like an early warning system, so that on a systems level, you are identifying students early on who are in need of more support than your Tier 1. Okay, Tara's monitoring the chat box, so if you have any quick questions you want to ask or that come up, please be sure to put them in that chat box. Let's be clear about who we're talking about today. We're talking about all students with behavior challenges. So this is not just for students with emotional behavioral disorders. Students with and without IEPs who may be experiencing any one of these mental health diagnoses, and students who experience an error in behavior thinking, like maybe they just made a temporary error. We also want to be mindful of students who are internalizing behaviors as much as our students who are exhibiting externalizing behaviors. We have to get this right. Like I get intense when I think about behavior systems. When I say we have to get this right, among students with disabilities, those with an emotional disturbance have the highest dropout rates. Students with the emotional disturbance have approximately double the dropout rate than our overall dropout rate for students with disabilities in Pennsylvania. That's why Pennsylvania we had a P2G grant. So we really put all our monies into targeting what we can do more for students with emotional behavior disorders. On the prevention side, how can we support their pathway to graduation, knowing that they are coping with a disability every day? So for today, we have a continuum of students we're thinking about. So all teachers, Tier 1. Tier 1 means all students with and without IEPs. So we're not just talking about our students with the most intense need, but to be clear, students with the most intense need still benefit from Tier 1 prevention strategies. This table just gives us an idea of how many of our public school students are eligible for IDEA services with the disability category of emotional disturbance. So just to give you an idea and to be mindful of Pennsylvania, our total Pennsylvania enrollment is over 1.5 million. A percentage of that you see is almost 300,000 students in Pennsylvania that receive IDEA services. And then I broke it down. You know, there are other disability categories of how students qualify for IDEA services. But here you can see relative to students with intellectual disabilities, other health impairments, specific learning disabilities, these are the students who are most likely in your classrooms, in your school buildings. So a low rate, you say 1.46% of students of our total public school enrollment experience, I'm going to just give this to you, are identified with emotional behavioral disturbance to qualify for services. But we know with absolute certainty there are many, many students that go without being identified. So when we break this down by age, we can see the dramatic uptick for our middle school and high school students. This logically means that middle school supports and our high school teachers especially must be equipped and ready to deploy strategies to support students in their classrooms who are growing and developing every day in behavior, just as they are in reading and math. It's not enough that the content area teachers only teach content. The other 50% of the formula is preventing and responding to behaviors as students grow, the whole student academically, behaviorally, emotionally. So as a teacher, we have a view here of students who are identified with emotional behavioral disorders who you can pretty much assure will have a need in your classroom. And again, there are other students who do not have IEPs, who go up and down our tier 1 in need of tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. Okay, so we've set the stage a little bit. You understand the continuum of all students that we're really working to help think about our learning for today. I want to share with you this really great article. The link is on the resource slide at the end of the presentation, but this was such a concise article. It comes out of Behavior Code. Great website if you haven't been there. And the article is so concise, but I want you to really understand the components of behavior. So give me a second here. I have to script some of this for myself because I don't want to get off the path. We only have an hour. So we build reading skills, just like we build our reading skills. Look, there's phonics, phonemic awareness, vocabulary, comprehension, fluency. All teachers generally understand the components of reading. Now you have to ask yourself, what are the components of behavior? So I want you to read this article. Symptoms, communication, function, and pattern. That's what makes up behavior. That's what we want to really work to address when it comes to prevention and response at tier 1. In this article, these are changes that we know last. When you manage the antecedent, by the way, when you implement PBIS, there's a plan for that. When we reinforce desired behavior, teaching replacement behavior, addressing undeveloped social and emotional skills, strategically responding to negative behavior with evidence-based strategy. I've highlighted these in yellow because all of these are addressed strategically when you implement tier 1 in your MTSS for behavior, PBIS. All right, so find this article. I'm not gonna unpack this right now. I wanna be mindful of time. So I'm gonna move on and be brief about PBIS in early warning systems. I don't know how many administrators we have on the call, but when you're, for teachers, when you're talking to administrators, when you're saying, why have we not yet embarked on the pathway to installing MTSS for academics or NTSS for behaviors or the both? You have to ask yourself why, because Every Student Succeed Act mentions it 5 times. So enough to, I'm not going to say any more about that, except you really want to be advocating and pushing and trying to plan for that. It's phenomenal. And I'll tell you what, one reason we hear often why schools or districts don't move into installing PBIS is because they say we do not have behavior problems. And my counter question to that is, how do you know if you're not explicitly collecting the data? And when you have your triangle data, at least you can confidently say, our students are responding to our tier 1 at a 80%, a rate of 80%. Okay. So school-wide PBIS, I think many of you have heard this language. It's a framework. It is not a program. It's a framework for evaluating, adopting, implementing evidence-based practices. And we're going to look at some of those right now. This is the PA icon for MTSS. Note that it is an integrated academics, behavioral, social, emotional instruction is your aim. And inside, circling on the outside of all the data, when you get your data systems in place, is this ongoing strategic problem-solving cycle that has a team ready and equipped, that has a team that has protected time, that they are always looking at that data and making decisions or offering affirmations for what is working. So check it out. This is not a new slide for many of us, but I really want to keep us grounded. Don't overlook the power of this slide. You can also use this to turn around and try and convince or promote PBIS back at your school. So many LEAs who are implementing MTSS for reading, for math, typically start out building one at a time. There's more evidence moving forward that leaders can do both at the same time. And there's lots of work going on in Pennsylvania right now to explore healthy ways to do that. And pretty much this because when you do academics and behaviors, the team engages in the same practice, or just around different data, and the interventions are different. So a lot of overlap. We just want you to be mindful of where we are today, which is really looking at tier 1. Prevention, tier 1 response. Tara, any questions before we move on?
Not at this time.
Okay. All right, I want to give you this visual. You may have seen this in a different format, but I need to just pause here for a second. Oftentimes, our teachers jump right to the interventions. Tell me what to do when a student is disruptive in class. And we really want you to understand that while that is important, the other 50% of what needs to happen is a system in place to support the work of tier 1 interventions, the work of tier 2, and the work of tier 3. Once students are responding at a rate of 80%, we know that our tier 1 design is effective, and then we can move forward to getting our secondary systems teams in place and our tertiary systems team in place. So to be clear, on the bottom of your screen, you see evidence-based strategies we know work. Universal supports, we're going to unpack today briefly. I'm going to give you a lot of resources. Systems, tier 2 systems, generally respond for students that are showing a need for tier 2. We go right into check-in, check-out. Social academic instructional groups and FBA work to guide next steps. That's a future behavior bite possibly. We also then move to our tertiary systems, which would be things like check and connect, person-centered planning, and things like renew. All right, so remember, your question isn't always just tell me what to do. You want to be cognizant of having a system in place, which would be your tier 1 team. I'm going to show you what that looks like here in a minute. So in any classroom, when we consider tier 1 supports, for math, just as we do for reading, we deliver curriculum that works coupled with instructional practices. So curriculum, instructional practices. We then look for an 80% response rate to determine the impact of tier 1. I always think of Dr. Tina Lawson, when I view this slide, I don't know who said, we call this a tattoo slide. This is the counterpart to your triangle. We always think in data practices systems. So practices, don't worry, we're gonna get to the good stuff. Hang in there. I know you're like, what are the interventions? What are the prevention strategies? But you really need to understand this because it's just critical to our thinking about how we respond to behavior. So practices are interventions and strategies that are evidence-based. They support student behavior. Your systems are what we do on a systems level that supports staff behavior, like a decision-making flow chart that everybody is using consistently. Common definitions for behavior that everybody understands and uses consistently. And then the blue circle is our data. The utility of data points, such as office discipline referrals, majors and minors, that all flow into the tier 1 team that empower their decision making so that you can reach that 80%, knowing that your tier 1 behavior curriculum is working. So all of these together impact your outcomes. If you aren't a part of a team that's a part of building or implementing your PBIS, this is something that you would learn along the way. I'm going to open up a poll here real quick, and I would like for you to read the question here that says, what is your relation to your PBIS Tier 1 team? Are you on the team working to install? Are you on the team as a member and you have all your products in place and you're implementing? Are you not on the team, but your school has a team? And is your school, or maybe your school just is not implementing yet? Totally okay. God, I love this process. I've read about how to do polls. This like is so exciting. Look, you're all responding. Okay, 85, we're halfway there. I think we have 85 participants with 53 responses. Drum roll.
Silky, we had a question come in while everybody's submitting their to their poll.
I'm listening.
If you are in a school or program that is solely an emotional support program, would it be normal for the triangle to be skewed, even if the program is implementing effective interventions? A referral to our program is a tier 3 support for other buildings in our district.
I love this question. So the answer is there's a few components here, and I'll be brief, and you can email me afterwards if you need more. Look, what you do at tier 1 is going to look like tier 3 interventions in a typical school building. So those students that you're receiving who have intensive needs, for example, maybe all of your students are receiving check-in, check-out, or all of your students are receiving renew. That grounds your tier 1 practices. And in that regard, when you look at your data, you still should be aiming for an 80, 15, 5, your 80%, because you're looking to serve your whole populace. If you have 100 students and what you're doing to gauge what you're doing to serve them, and you're only reaching 50% of them, that's an indicator to you that programming needs more work. I hope that makes sense. So no matter what type of student you're serving, you need to be thinking of your 80, 20, your 80, 15, 5 as an indicator of effectiveness of programming. If those numbers aren't there, then you need to go back and tighten up your core. You need to look at that core. What are you doing in your curriculum? Or maybe you need to know the needs of your students better, or the needs of your families better. I hope that helps. I'm going to open up I'm going to end the poll. Thank you. I have 64 responses. Excellent. Okay, so we have 8 people who are on the team and are working to install. We have 26 people who are on the team as a member, and they're currently building infrastructure and getting ready to implement. 25 of you have a team, but you're not on the team. And hopefully maybe you're helping to contribute to product or get feedback. And then finally, there's 7 people who are in schools who do not, and I love this data. There's only 7 of our people here that are in a school that are not I think if we would have pulled this 5 or 10 years ago, that last number would be higher. Thank you all for giving us feedback. Okay, so I'm going to move on to, I'm going to keep moving here. I'm on slide 24. Okay. So in a nutshell, there are 9 practices. Okay. When school administrators designate a Tier 1 team, one of their tasks when installing Tier 1 is to create infrastructure that addresses each of these 9 items. So let's say you're in a building that's not implementing. These are 9 items that will prevent challenging behaviors from occurring, or at the point that they're preventing, they're going to help extinguish them as quick as possible. These 9 things positively impact student behavior and therefore academic growth. We always want to keep those 2 tied together. Know that when your building goes through Tier 1 team training for installing PBIS framework, each one of these 9 things is addressed. So I'm not going to read all of them, but there are problem behaviors that are defined. That's a Tier 1 practice. Everyone understands what disruption looks like, or what defiance looks like, or what forgetting your homework looks like. There's a plan for teaching behavior. And all of those things are tied to the expectations. So what do we expect of our students? This is strategically laid out. Every one of these things goes back to what adults, and in many cases now students at the table, deem as desired behavior that will encourage academic engagement and encourage a healthy, positive climate. If you're running without these as a common adult unit, you are more likely to see challenging behaviors occur. Here are the latter ones. Students experience success rates at 75%. So you know how I said you want to gauge your response, your students' response? It should be about 80% is an indication, and you can be confident that what you're doing is working. Same with academics. For students who are failing classes and are not doing well, they are more likely to have more behavior challenges. I'm not going to talk about today what begets the other. Is it behavior than academic? Definitely a lot of research in that area. But students who experience a higher rate of academic success do better behaviorally. Okay. I'm going to move through these. I'm going to go right to this slide. So this is a strategy I want to talk about real quickly, and this is a thinking strategy. So check it out. Just as we would instructionally engage reading difficulties diagnostically. So if a student is reading and you determine they're having trouble with their vowel control R's, we know that. Then we start to drill down and we go to an explicit lesson to help them correct what that is, right? So let's practice moving away from deficit thinking questions to framing our behavior as an instructional opportunity. This requires practice. So I'm going to do an I do, we do, you do. So here's an example. Look at this top row. If the challenging behavior is constantly moving about, our deficit thinking question would be, why won't Zoe sit crisscross during read aloud time? The new question is, how can I restructure the read aloud experience so Zoe can move and learn simultaneously? This thinking error that comes up requires that we do a little bit of a neutralizing routine for ourselves to catch ourselves when we're thinking this way so we can flip our own behavior, our own thinking. And instead of thinking of it as this student is being rude and disrespectful and will not sit still, we want to think of it as either a developmental skill set that hasn't been developed, or maybe we need to open up the way we're teaching so that the student can move simultaneously and learn at the same time. The next one is talking. It's us and talking. Why is Liam interrupting during math when I'm trying to teach a lesson? The new thinking would be, how can I create interactive discussions during lessons, sending the message that meaningful participation is valued? So again, explicitly teaching behavior, giving opportunity to practice. I'm going to show you a few more strategies that we might deploy when a student is talking, and you know they know better. So that was a we do. I want to do, that was an I do. I want to do a we do. And so if the challenge behavior is shutting down, you have a student that is completely shut down. There are different degrees of that, of course. But if the deficit thinking question is, why does Jazz hide her face when unfamiliar adults speak to her? Some people don't think that's a problem, right? So even that is up to each of us to determine if that's a real problem. But there are some teachers who would find that offensive. And we need to ask ourselves why, because this is a developmental skill set, and this is not explicitly taught at home for some kids. So eye contact is for a variety of reasons. So deficit thinking question, our new question would be, how can we support Jazz to develop relationships and interact effectively with new adults? All right, so here's the last one. Take a quick poll for a moment. Let's do what you do. Consider the fourth scenario. Why does Isaiah frequently bicker with classmates during playground time? Which of the following would be your new response? Yeah, this is a no-brainer, but I had to play. I love this. Okay, everyone should be selecting not the first one, which is how can I get him off the playground? But we know I've encountered people, I myself used to be this way. I used to think like this. So absolutely. The new thinking would be, yeah, what social skills could we be teaching to help him better engage cooperatively in learning groups? I'm sorry, yeah, in groups on the playground. Thank you for participating. Okay, let's keep moving here. Okay, so we've talked about just rethinking, kind of trying to catch ourselves with that deficit thinking, replace with a positive, like what else can I be doing as a teacher to instruct, to think about that student's experience. UDL, look, it is a huge field out there. I can't unpack it, but you need to know that classroom teachers who are running with practices that implement UDL practices at the point that they're planning show a decrease in challenging behaviors in the classroom. So I'm not going to unpack this. I have included a handout for your consideration, and there's a resource at the end, but we really need to call out UDL. If I could add another poll today, if I had time, I would want to know how many of you have had PD, professional development around UDL, and how many of you had made that explicit shift to planning at the point that you're planning for instruction, that you are using UDL practices. So here's what we know to show teachers that it actually is possible to address needs of all students in the classroom at the same time. These quotes come from teachers who are implementing UDL and who want other teachers. They're trying to bring you over. UDL removes barriers and provides equitable, meaningful access to all students. Again, these are quotes by teachers. UDL, I use UDL to be more reflective practitioner, to make spaces for language learners, and so that all students have access to higher levels of learning. This is hands down a tier 1 practice. If you are planning and engaging in your planning practices without thinking about universal design for learning, you want to reach out to your administrator and say, hey, sign me up. I need to know more. Okay, so I feel like I'm jumping in and out. Stick with me. We're going to talk about behavior lesson plans. So remember, we're still in prevention. We talked about universal design for learning. Let's visit the explicit teaching of behavior to students. If you have behaviors in front of you that you know you have not taught, we cannot punish students for that. So behavior lesson plans are part of installing and implementing Tier 1 Pbis. So some of you on the call have already walked through the process of coming together as a building team of teachers and creating your behavior lesson plans that's based on your behavior grid. So if we are the St. Thomas Owls and we are responsible, dependable, and safe, then our behavior lesson plans are tied to those 3 expectations. There's a handout in the folder in the file or in the folder for today that has an example of a behavior lesson plan template. It's not enough that we plan them. The finishing touch is that you actually have a schedule to teach and roll out your behavior lesson plans. When you implement PBIS, you really don't say how often to teach them, but we see amazing practices of teaching. So there are buildings that actually embed their behavior lesson plans in their social studies classrooms for secondary settings. We have buildings that have a lesson plan schedule for behavior that they do in the beginning of the year after we come back from break. And then they use those behavior lesson plans at the point that a student is in need of tier 2. They pull that behavior lesson plan and make it unique to that student or that group of students. I made this slide for today because I was thinking about tier 1 and teaching, explicitly teaching. I often get the question, and I myself used to have this question: what's the difference between behavior learning and social emotional learning? If we're doing behavior lesson plans, do we need to do social emotional learning lesson plans, or vice versa? If we have an SEL curriculum, do we need to have behavior lesson plans? And the answer is yes. So here's how this works. Let me try and ground myself. I feel like I'm rambling. I've unpacked it just for you in reading. So behavior learning teaches the day-to-day behaviors that help students be successful in the school environment. So dude, if it's in the code of conduct, you better be teaching it. So that explicit teams that align their code of conduct, their expectation grid, and their disciplinary flow chart have it going on. It is fair, it is equitable to students, and families have been a part of it. That's teaching those behaviors. That's your behavior curriculum. Social emotional learning, on the other hand, is very different. This is a quote I took from Castle. I have the link at the end of our resources for today. Social emotional learning is the process through which children and adults acquire and effectively apply knowledge and attitudes and skills necessary. So this is about feelings, about what to do with our feelings, about what to do in social scenarios that are positive and build positive relationships. Okay, so having said that, tier 1, having a healthy set of behavior lesson plans that have been created for tier 1, having your social emotional learning curriculum is critical. If you're in a school that doesn't have a social emotional curriculum established, you want to be moving that way. Go to Castle, figure out how to make one, figure out which ones are really effective. If you have more questions, there's professionals in your patent office, and I guarantee you at your intermediate units too, that have the information that you need to better build your confidence on both your behavior curriculum and your social emotional learning curriculum. So this is typically what social emotional curriculum is built around. These are the competencies that we aim for. There's a handout that I've included. And what I want you to know here is that Pennsylvania coupled with Castle, and they generated, voila, the career readiness skills. So the question for you today is, how are you embedding these career readiness skills in your classroom? So you don't need a formal social emotional learning program. There's a lot out there we can buy. If you're going to create one, or if you have created one, right here is what we would embed into that social emotional learning curriculum. Also, if you have students with IEPs, these are fantastic behavior social emotional goals so that you're not fishing around. These are standards that you can tie to. These are available on the PBE website. And I think I've also included this as an explicit handout. Okay, so again, this is prevention. If you want to really prevent challenging behaviors from occurring, we want to teach behavior. We want to teach social emotional learning, and we want to have a schedule. So lesson plans and a schedule for teaching them. A shout out to formative assessment. I love formative assessment. I wish when I want to go back to the classroom, this is the reason why. I wish I would have had more of this understanding as a teacher in the classroom. So earlier we touched on UDL. Within UDL model of instruction is formative assessment. So before you say, yeah, I do formative assessment, I really want to equip you or encourage you to self-assess. What are your formative assessment skills? Are you implementing formative assessment with fidelity? So formative assessment skills for teachers to inform your future instruction, inform games. Excuse me. Formative assessment builds confidence for students as they contribute to goal setting, feedback loops, and self and peer assessment. Formative assessment practices is the conversations that you have. And look, this ES stands for effect size. This is not the world according to Silke. Research hands down tells us the effect size of formative assessment comes in at 0.9. So if 0.2 is a threshold for indicating something that has impact and is worth our time, our money, our resources, you can sure bet your last dollar that formative assessment at 0.9, anything you do around formative assessment is responsible use of your public dollars. So hop on that train if you haven't already. If you're not sure where to get this learning, I believe I put a resource at the end, but there's more to feedback than just the letter grade that goes on the project that student just gave. So co-creating success criteria. That means doing it with your students so they understand what their goal is. You want to secure their target of learning. Any moving target for them will increase anxiety and increase your challenging behaviors. So you want to build their confidence through formative assessment. They're involved. Activating learners so they can self and peer assess their learning, has them increasing their engagement in instruction. So again, while you're going, but what do I do with that challenging behavior that happens? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of, how does that go? How does that go? Okay, so this is your prevention. If you do not or are not engaging in formative assessment practices, we beg you, please hop on that train. Okay, teacher-student relationships. Tons of research around teacher-student relationships. And by the way, both formative assessment practices, UDL practices, and installing your MTSS, your PBIS, all of those products encourage and contribute to healthy, positive teacher-student relationships. Coming in with an effect size of 0.70. I want to share this. They interviewed students about their teacher-student relationships, and these are the 5 categories that surfaced, and I want you to take them with you. And I want you to self-assess what you're doing to build and maintain your positive teacher relationships. So this is what students said. It takes 2. So it's not just incumbent upon the student to hold that relationship in place. At the time that teacher and student have fallen out, that adult needs to engage in restoring, repairing that relationship. It's not just incumbent on that student. And that's how we teach them how to recover relationships. Also, what was pulled out of it was don't be unfair. Negative experiences, unfair practices contribute to negative teacher-student relationships. And we know that contributes to the disengagement cycle for students. So check your implicit bias, know your vulnerable decision points, and be sure that you have a neutralizing routine in place so that you keep those positive student-teacher relationships in place. I guarantee you, if those students feel liked, if they feel valued, if they feel a sense of belonging, they are more likely to engage in that instruction. They say, talk to us. And by talking to us, that bonding and problem solving through conversation naturally occurs. They are asking for help, adapt students' academic and personal needs. You have to know what they need so that but through formative assessment, know what they need so that you as a teacher can fill that need. And then be kind. This is one of my favorite ones. Be mindful of your tone and expression. No kid, my own kids included, do not like to see a ragtag adult in front of them that's got like a real, here's what we're gonna do today. This is when it's due, and here's how you're gonna do it. Nixie ixie. Get better at emotional labor, folks. I'm telling you, if there's anything that's gonna, you have to sell yourself. You have to be credible in order to get those students to at the table and to stay at the table. So be mindful of your face and your tone. It can be off-putting.
We had a question. Is this okay? An okay time to ask it?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so what are your thoughts in successfully building this relationship through remote learning?
Absolutely, and that's why we're here today, right? Lots of ways through remote learning that we see building actually social emotional learning, as well as, I'm going to give you some examples of social emotional learning, and in doing so you cultivate and build those relationships. So one example that we've seen is, I just have to go through my notes here a second. One example is sending brief notes to students. One example that I've seen is a teacher, instead of giving summative final exam, gave a summative English, or I'm sorry, like an English project with a co-created success criteria. Students created it, and what they came up with was they read a children's book. This was a high school. This was like a 10th grade English class. The child was allowed to pick a children's book and outline which social emotional learning competencies were that they saw in the characters in the book, and then generalize to themselves, and then come back and share. And that in itself built relationship between students as a team, as a group of students that were synchronously in a Zoom working through those final projects. As far as individually reaching out to students, there's many ways to do that. Even if you pull your students together synchronously and you're in a Zoom, your kind words, your caring, your affirming what they're experiencing will build relationships. Here's one more thing on it. Look, there are 3 things. You know, if you're, let's say any relationship, if you feel like that relationship is off, you need to check for 3 things. Is that youth experiencing a sense of engagement? I'm sorry, a sense of caring, a sense of belonging, and a sense of expectations. And then as somebody who's going to rescue that relationship, you need to ask yourself, how am I showing that I care for that student? How am I showing that, how am I providing like a sense of belonging, that that student belongs in this relationship? And how am I providing clear expectations for that student? Those 3 things. And I can't sit here and pretend that I'm engaging high school or elementary students. I don't get to do that. But my advice to you is to find ways to send them little notes of encouragement, and use those 3 indicators to help yourself go, I think this youth might need a little bit more caring. They might need a sense of that they belong here. For students that are not showing up all together, that's got to be a team effort on a systems level to capture those students that are not attending at all. But even those students who are not attending at all, your attempts to build that positive student relationship will impact their desire to be there. I hope that helps. Okay, we're coming into the end. I have a little bit more time left. I want to talk about self-determination. I'm going to move past this, actually. I want to get to something else, co-creating. So I want to talk briefly about response, but not too briefly. So look, I've talked about prevention. I want to wrap up today talking about response. And let me just move forward here. These are all the proven strategies for responding to behavior. Tier 1 teams that are working to install and implement their MTSS for behavior have a document that supports teachers so that all teachers are responding to challenging behaviors using these strategic responses. and so that teachers are not defaulting to their negative punishers that destroy positive teacher-student relationships and contribute to the cycle of school disengagement. As you explore each one of these, be sure you know what it means to practice that strategy with fidelity. You can visit ci3t.org for professional development tools to build your skills around these awesome practices. You can also find Effective Classroom Practice Toolkit at papbs.org, which is Pennsylvania's PBS network, that has a tool to self-evaluate your use of some of these strategies. Now, I want to bring your attention to something. They're in this order for a reason. The first one is your less intensive. It doesn't take a lot of energy to engage in planned ignoring, all the way to conferencing with a student. So direct eye contact, make sure you know what it means and how to engage in direct eye contact, because you don't want to scowl at that student. You don't want to put them off, but you want to give them direct eye contact. So I can't unpack all of these today, but know that these are all evidence-based strategies, so that once we have our teacher units, understanding what it means to reteach, we have a system for reteaching, that you also are hopefully working towards the goal with your colleagues, your teachers, to responding to inappropriate behavior. It doesn't have to be all of these, by the way. There were teams that might just use 5 of these. So they start out by teaching their teachers 5 of these responses, and then they add as they move forward. So one of the questions we get sometimes is, yeah, but I currently have these in place. I have to take a moment, and I hope that you do the same, that you turn this back around to your colleagues. If you're an IU TAC, that you turn this back around, and if you're an administrator, we wish you the courage to interrupt this practice in any classroom. And this is called a response cost strategy. My aim here is not to insult anyone. I find that easily happens when I want to communicate to teachers that there's no research anywhere that has yielded positive effect size for this practice. Got it? None. Some teachers spend a lot of time branding and designing this type of display for students, even virtually. Look, Classroom Dojo, you can set your settings so it meets the following criteria. I'm going to show you in a second. Research tells us, hands down, this practice has a negative impact on behavior. Okay, so you're saying, but how can I evaluate the practices I'm doing for all students? Here's a quick checklist. Is it proactive or reactive? I'm not going to read all of these for you. Does your system include reteaching? Does your system acknowledge students? Are you acknowledging students for displaying the appropriate behavior, the behavior you want to see? So I know some of you are going, but what do I do for that student that incessantly, always? That's a tier 2 hour behavior bite. Actually, it's a tier 2 systems 2-day training. But for today, that's kind of where we stop. We want to really be thinking about prevention and about what to do to respond to those challenging behaviors that are hiccups in your day. Before we finish, I want to make sure that we talk about that I convey to you, because we don't get to talk today, that I convey to you that it is just important that your school has a system for evaluating your tier 1 practices. We started out with these examples. These are the data points you want to bring in. Even as a classroom teacher, if you run this data, if you don't have this data for yourself, take some time, set it up, run it for each student. That would be considered an early warning system. Having this data system in place is so critical. So you know, maybe what you're doing already is getting a response rate of 80%. You'll be golden then. You'll feel so good about what you're doing. So look at this data. If you have a tier 1 team in place, they're already running this data. I've provided in the drive today a handout that you see right in front of you. These are the recommended thresholds. So at the point that your students start to show distress, they would be off track on the screen here. At the point that they're hitting those numbers, that you have a tier 2 and a tier 3 systems in place to catch those students. But here's the thing, folks, it's called critical capacity. there's a reason why we engage in so much tier 1 effort, because your resources to support your students in need of tier 2 are only so much. These are the references that we've used today to build this behavior bite. These are also additional resources. There's a PDF of the slides for today. You can find those, and you Google any one of those and it'll land you right on that page as well. Upcoming behavior bites, you have one more left before we break for the year. De-escalation and cool down tactics to diffuse escalated instructional moments. I hope that today has been helpful to you. I hope I have not spoken too fast and that the visuals were supported. A shout out to Dr. Catherine Poggi. She could not be with us today, but she is with us in spirit. We hope that, a shout out to also Tara Russo for your help. I'm gonna pause right here. Any questions? I know it's 12:30. Okay, everybody, have an awesome Tuesday. Thank you for being here. I'm gonna sit right here in case Tara wants to read any more of the questions. That's all for, I'm sorry, it's just a bite of behavior for today. We hope to see you next week.
We did have a question